Hello, everyone. My name is Stanley St. Rose, and today we're going to be talking about Oliver Twist, written by Charles Dickens. Now, before I go into the summary and explanation of this novel, please remember to leave a like, subscribe, and/or comment so that the channel can continue to grow and so I know to keep making more videos. Now, the story of Oliver Twist is very sad. Most of the story we do follow Oliver Twist and we see the things that he has to go through to survive. A lot of it is sad, but we do get a nice closure, a nice end of the story, and we do get some closure with the story, and it leaves us off in a good place. So the novel begins with the birth of Oliver Twist. After Oliver is born, his mom dies, and when his mom dies, he basically becomes an orphan. Even though his mom did have some items to prove who Oliver is and how they could potentially find Oliver's birthright or the things that he's supposed to receive for being who he is, the person who was there when Oliver was being born, she just keeps it for herself. So Oliver becomes an orphan, and this man by the name of Mr. Bumble actually takes Oliver and he puts him into a home so he can be taken care of. In that home, he actually gets treated very poorly. The woman who is taking care of him, the money that she receives to take care of him, she basically keeps most of it for herself, and then the rest she basically gives him, the most, simple foods that she can give them, and she mistreats them. They're pretty much starving most of the time. So after a while, when Oliver becomes older, he becomes this child who's underneath the care of these wise individuals or these religious individuals, and they give him and a bunch of other boys basically nothing to eat. And in this way of life, Oliver is starving. He's not happy whatsoever. And one day, encouraged by the other boys, he asks for more food. And these wise individuals and Mr. Bumble, they're all mad at Oliver. They're like, you should be grateful for what we give you. You know, you have no one, you have no parents, and we're giving you food, we're giving you a place to live. You should be grateful to us. You shouldn't be asking for more. And because he asked for more food, just for more food, they decide, you know what, we're going to throw you into this dark, nasty room and lock the door because you just don't deserve anything we give you. So after this whole thing happens, they even treat Oliver even more. Just they just keep treating him horribly, and they try to sell him off to become a chimney sweeper. But Oliver doesn't want this, and he cries out against it. And he's right for doing so because in England, in London, at this point of time, if you become a chimney sweeper as a child, there's a good chance you're not going to live to become an adult, and there's a good chance that if you do live to be an adult, you're going to be stunted. You're not going to develop because that type of job really stunts a child's growth. So Oliver fights against it, and they don't sell him off to become that, but they do sell him off to an undertaker, which is not that much better, but I guess it's better than being a chimney sweeper. That pretty much meant death. So Oliver goes with this undertaker. He's being treated badly there too. He gets, the worst of foods, and because he's so sad, because he's had a horrible life, he doesn't know his parents, he doesn't know any family member of his. He just looks bad. He looks depressed. He looks sad. The Undertaker picks him over this other boy by the name of Noah to accompany him on business trips when seeing the family members of deceased individuals. So Oliver goes with this Undertaker on several trips, and Noah, the other kid, he's actually very mad at Oliver, and he gets back at him by setting Oliver up. What he does is he tells Oliver, "Your mom is a horrible person." He ridicules Oliver's mom, and then he forces Oliver to attack him. When Oliver attacks him, he screams out. He tells everybody in the house that Oliver is a monster. He shouldn't be with us because if we keep him around, there's a good chance that Oliver is going to kill us in our sleep. So they lock Oliver in a closet. They speak to those wise religious individuals. They speak to Mr. Bumble, and what they tell them is that you shouldn't be feeding Oliver meat. boys his age, orphans, if you feed them any meat, they're gonna act out, they're gonna be mad, and they're going to do bad things, which makes no sense. So Oliver, after realizing that they're going to treat him badly and not feed him properly, he basically escapes from the house of the Undertaker and he walks all the way to London, which is very, very, very far away. He walks the way there. Sometimes he sleeps on the street. He sleeps in the woods or in a bush or wherever he can find to sleep, and he eats whatever he can find. He had some money with him that he uses to buy bread, but after that is gone. He's basically starving on the streets. So he walks all the way to London. He walks on the King's Highway all the way to London, and no one really cares about him. No one, helps him out. He's a young boy, pretty much 8 to 9 years old, and he's already suffering this much. When he reaches London, he meets another individual by the name of the Artful Dodger. The Artful Dodger is a thief, but Oliver doesn't really know this. What happens is the Artful Dodger brings Oliver to this man by the name of Fagin. Fagin is a criminal. He's also called the Jew within this novel, which is also very bad because this book, in that way, it's kind of anti-Semitic because it's just showing that this Jew is just bad, bad, bad. So Oliver becomes a trainee, or he starts to work for Fagin. He doesn't know that he is in a criminal. He's in the midst of a criminal. So basically they make him do small things that doesn't really scream to Oliver that he's doing things that are illegal. So he does them, and he's kind of happy because now he has a place to sleep and he has some food to eat. But when he goes on the street for the first time to commit a crime, he doesn't know that he's going to commit a crime until the Artful Dodger, the Dodger, and this other boy steals a handkerchief from a man called Mr. Brownlow, who's like in a bookstore perusing a book. When Oliver sees this, he runs away, and Mr. Brownlow looks up and he sees Oliver running away. So he right away assumes that it's Oliver that stole his handkerchief when it's not at all. Oliver's only running away because he's surprised that all of this time he's only been in a criminal organization, stealing things. So Oliver runs away, and Mr. Brownlow starts yelling, "Thief, thief, thief!" And everybody runs after Oliver. This mob forms, and they beat up Oliver, and they take him to court. The judge pretty much says, okay, there's no evidence. They didn't find any handkerchief on him, but we're going to send Oliver to do 3 months of hard labor. And Mr. Brownlow says, no, maybe we shouldn't do this. There's no evidence that he did it. I'm not even sure that's the right boy. And the judge says, I really don't care. He's going to do 3 months' time. But what happens is the only thing that saves Oliver is the bookstore owner. He rushes in. He says it wasn't Oliver. Oliver only ran away because he saw the other two boys running away and stealing from Mr. Brownlow. So what he does is he ran away because he was just scared. So because of what the bookstore owner says, the judge lets Oliver go, and Mr. Brownlow, feeling bad for Oliver and what just took place, he says, "Oliver, do you want to come and live with me?" So Oliver goes to live with Mr. Brownlow, and soon after this, he actually gets a fever. Oliver is really sick, and the maid of Mr. Brownlow actually takes care of Oliver, and she brings him back to health. Soon after this, Mr. Brownlow gives Oliver new clothing, he feeds them, and he gets stronger and healthier. Mr. Brownlow has this friend by the name of Mr. Grimwick. Mr. Grimwick is not an evil man, but he told Mr. Brownlow that Oliver was going to run away, and he's not a good kid. He's just a thief. So what they do is they give Oliver a bunch of books. They tell him to bring the books back to the store owner and to come back. So Oliver says, "Yes, I'll do this," but Mr. Grimrick said he's not coming back. While Oliver is on his way to bring the books back to the bookstore owner, he meets this girl by the name of Nancy, who he has met before. She works with Mr. Fagin and Bill Sykes. And what happens is Oliver meets Nancy and Bill Sykes on the road. They basically kidnap him and they bring him back to Mr. Fagin. And Mr. Fagin says, "Oh, we missed you. Where have you been?" And they take off his new clothes, his nice clothes. They take the books, they sell it off, and they make money off of it. and Oliver's just right back to stealing. He's right back into this pretty much organization of theft. So Oliver's there, and they have this new heist or this new thing that they are planning to steal from this woman by the name of Mrs. Mainley. And so they prepare Oliver. They go to this house, this really nice house of Mrs. Mainley, and Bill Sykes goes, and they try to push in Oliver into this small window for him to get inside the house of Mrs. Mainley, open the door for them to get in, and so that they can rob the place. But as soon as Oliver goes into the small window, somebody had a gun, shoots at Oliver. Oliver gets hit. They grab Oliver and they try to run with him, but when they realize people are coming after them, they drop Oliver on the on the road, and they save their own skin. So Oliver, waking up from a daze, he actually goes back to the house. He knocks on the front door. He says, "I need help. I've been shot." And so the people realize it wasn't the men that they shot. It was a little boy by the name of Oliver. And Rose, who is a person that works for Mrs. Mainley, she's actually kind of like adopted by Mrs. Mainley. And Rose Mainley, Mrs. Mainley, they take Oliver in, they nurse him back to health, they get the bullet out, they get a doctor and everything, and Oliver's nursed back to health. There is an investigation that goes on, but they weren't able to find the culprits. The women keep Oliver, they nurse him back to health, and then they keep him in their care. And then what happens is Mrs. Mainley and Rose Mainley, they actually go on a vacation. They bring Oliver, and while Oliver is with them, they actually give him some education because till this point he had no education. He knew nothing about the world. So they give him some education. They go on long walks with him. This is pretty much the first family Oliver's ever had. He's happy. He's growing up. He's eating well. He has good clothes. So he's having a good life. So that's Oliver's story to this point. Now we have to talk about another part of the story that's developing. There's another man called Monks who is Oliver's half brother. When Monks's father, who is also Oliver's father, was in an unhappy marriage with Monks's father, um, wow, I messed that up. So Monks has a father, which he shares with Oliver. And Monks's father was in a unhappy marriage with Monks's mother, and they broke up. And Monks's father starts seeing Agnes, which is Oliver's mother. Monks's father dies before Oliver is born, and then in his will he writes, "If Oliver grows up to not be a criminal, he can have my fortune." So the fortune is there, and Monks knows of it. So what he's trying to do is to either make everyone see Oliver as a criminal or eradicate all of the evidence that will pinpoint Oliver as the son of his father. He has a relationship with Bill Sykes, and when he was talking to Bill Sykes, he was very happy because the woman who was there when Oliver's mom died, she has passed away. And the trinkets and the things that would reveal that Oliver was the son of Monks's father, he takes them and throws them into a river. He does this by having a conversation with Mr. Bumble and his new wife, Mrs. Corney, which was in the same workhouse where Oliver's mother had died. So Mrs. Corney in the novel had taken those trinkets from the woman that was there when Oliver was being born. So Mrs. Corney takes the trinkets from that woman, then gives it to Monks in the present, and he throws it down the river, and he pays Mrs. Corney and Mr. Bumble a good sum of money for that. So Mr. Bumble is very happy at this point. He's basically he has power. He's married this woman who is in a good position. He tries to take that position away from her, or that power away from Mrs. Corney, but Mrs. Corney is a strong woman, and she doesn't let Mr. Bumble take that power away from her. And they have a very violent and sometimes unhappy marriage. So they do make a good money or a good sum off of Mr. Monks from revealing that information, from giving those trinkets, and they go home happily. And they're in good positions. They're making money off of these children. He just made some good money off of Oliver, and they're very happy. So Monks goes off into his own way, and Mr. Bumble and Mrs. Corney go off into their own way. Now, what happens is Bill Sykes and Monks, they have this conversation revealing all of this. And Nancy, who's actually a good person, she is in the novel, she actually stands up for Oliver and in many different places. So she overhears or she listens to the conversation between Sykes and Monks about what they're going to do to Oliver to profit off of him, and she actually meets with Mr. Brownlow and with Rose mainly and reveals all of the things that have been going on. And what happens is, what's actually a little bit detrimental is that Noah actually comes back into the picture and he starts to work for um, Mr. Fagin. The reason why is because in the story we learned that he escaped from the Undertaker too, taking a good amount of money with him. So it's painted that, or it's shown in the novel that Noah stole from the Undertaker and then goes to London, and now he's living a life of crime. So Noah tells Fagin, and Sykes later learns that Nancy has told um, Rose and Mr. Brownlow all about what's going to happen to Oliver. So, in passion or in anger, Sykes kills Nancy, who is his girlfriend. The novel doesn't outright tell us this, but there are specific lines that reveal to us that Nancy's in fact Sykes' girlfriend, and it's also there are portions of the novel or scenes in the novel that can tell us that Nancy might also be a prostitute. So Sykes kills Nancy after he finds out about this. He leaves the house that he kills Nancy in. The authorities do figure out about this, and when Sykes comes back into London, he goes to this old decrepit neighborhood, and he goes into this old house, and then the authorities come knocking at the house. He tries to escape by going up on the roof and tries to like jump into the river that was real close to the house. But what happens? It was low tide, and when he jumps in a way where he lands and breaks his neck. And his dog, who is pictured in the novel, that was very loyal to him, even though that Sykes tried to kill this dog, the dog jumps after him, and the dog breaks his like his the dog's head cracks on a rock and its brains spill out, which I don't know why the dog had to die, but that's what happened. So Sykes dies in that way, and then we figure out that Fagin, the authorities catch up to him. The Dodger is arrested before all of this happens. He goes to prison or he's captured, and Fagin, the noose is like starting to tighten around his neck. The authorities catch him. He goes to trial, and they pretty much convict him to death. They're going to hang him. So all of these villains, they start to lose their grip on being villains, and they're going to die. So Mr. Brownlow, he actually meets with Rose mainly. Everybody who loves Oliver. Near the end of the novel, they all meet together. Oliver actually cleans his name by appearing in front of Mr. Brownlow and saying, "I never left. Nancy and Sykes kidnapped me. That's why I never came back." And Mr. Brownlow accepts Oliver into open arms. And so everybody who likes Oliver, everybody who sees that Oliver is a good person, they actually all come together and they want to help Oliver claim his fortune from his father. And you know that Monks is trying to take that away from him. So Mr. Brownlow actually gets in contact with Monks and he actually confronts him. And they have this meeting, and Mr. Brownlow presents a bunch of people or a bunch of evidence that would show that Oliver is the son of Monks' father. And Monks realizes that he doesn't have any more cards. he realizes that his plans have been thwarted. After Nancy's death and after everything that's happened, and with Sykes, he has no more allies. His plans are all revealed, and so he says fine, and he agrees. So Oliver wins his fortune, but Mr. Brownlow, being a smart man, he actually gives a good portion or half of Oliver's father's fortune to Monks. But what's really bad is that Monks takes this, and later in the novel, we learn that he goes off, he actually spends it and wastes it all. He goes back to being a criminal, and then he dies. So his life was, always going to end in, in sadness and darkness. So at the end of the novel, Mr. Brownlow adopts Oliver, and with Oliver's fortune, Oliver gets an education, and he starts to live a normal life as much as he can. Rose mainly gets married to the son of Mrs. Mainley, and we do learn that Rose is Oliver's aunt because Rose is the lost sister of Oliver's mother. So that's a very interesting part of the novel. The other thing that's an interesting part of the novel is also Rose and Mrs. Mainley's son. We learned that Rose and Mrs. Mainley's son they were very much interested in each other, but because Mrs. Mainley's son was in a better part of the society or upper class society, and Rose was part of the middle class or not as high as him, they were not likely to get married. So what happens is Mrs. Manley's son becomes a religious leader, and he marries Rose. So Rose gets married. Oliver becomes the adopted son of Mr. Brownlow. Mr. Brownlow raises him, and the story really ends there with Oliver having a good life. They all move into a good neighborhood together, and that's really how the novel ends. Oliver getting his justice, all of the, Fagin, the Alfred Dodger, Sykes, sadly Nancy, and other people who were evil or bad, they all end up dying. Um, they all end up dying. The only all of the people that tried to cause Oliver harm end up dying. The only ones that survive was pretty much Mr. Bumble. He just gets demoted and he loses his high ranked position. And yeah, so the novel really ends with that. We see Oliver having a good life. Now, the good thing that if we go towards the explanation and analysis of this novel, we can focus on how things, how like little things can matter a lot. Um, with Oliver Twist, there was an interesting part in the beginning of the novel where it says Oliver had been smothered with love and compassion from his parents and from his family members in the beginning of the novel. This is a specific line that's referenced that says that it's presented in the beginning of the novel. It says that if Oliver had been smothered by his loved ones, he would have died. So in the beginning, if he had loving people to take care of him as a baby, as a newborn, he would have died. But because he lived such a grueling life and a grueling beginning to his life, he survived. So that specific part of the novel really, like, to me, means that sometimes people do go through horrible things, but it is for sometimes it's for their own good. Because if we Oliver had gotten a nice life, loving mother and father, at as soon as he was born, novel said he would have died. So maybe a little bit of misery did help him to live a better life. And the other moral of the story, another good idea that happens in the story, is the whole thing about justice always catches up. These villains, these Sykes, Fagin, the Artful Dodger, Monks, they all lived a life of crime, and slowly but eventually they all met their end badly, and crime doesn't pay. And that's another interesting part of the novel, an interesting idea that is presented within this novel. It's what path is better. Is the path of crime and evil better, or the path of good and justice better? And so, is a good living better for you, or a bad living stealing from other people better from you for you? And the answer is no. A life of crime is not the best for an individual, because a life of crime never really pays, because there is this compare and contrast within the novel where we see an honest life versus a life of crime. And the criminals are always living in very bad places, torn down places, places of darkness, places of unhappiness and sadness, and they're always looking behind their backs. They're always suspicious. They're killing or hurting people that actually love them. Sex, for instance, Nancy was very fond of him. She wanted to take care of him, but he was just so mad that she had betrayed him. He just killed her, and she meant him no harm, and he just killed her. So a life of crime down that road, it all only leads to misery. It leads to paranoia, and you're really never happy, even if you do make money off of your crimes. Villains, criminals, they always end up living a horrible life that never ends well. Because all of these criminals that we're introduced to, none of their lives end in a happy place. But the people who are honest, they earn an honest living, they try their best, um, they end up in a good place. Oliver ended up in a good place because he chose good. He chose to follow a path that led him, to being a good person. And it's kind of interesting how his father put in his will that only if Oliver wasn't a criminal, he would receive his fortune. So there is a good question, or a general question within this novel saying, how do you choose good and evil? How do you choose a life of honesty or a life of crime? What puts you into those methods, and what puts you down those into those paths of life? Because Nancy, she had a chance to leave Sykes. She had a chance to live a better life, but she said she wouldn't leave Sykes. She wouldn't leave her method of life of being a criminal, and that just led to her death. And the reason why she said she wouldn't leave it's because she had been in it for so long, for her entire life, that for her that was her only reality. She didn't see any other reality. The only thing that she saw was that she was going to be a criminal until the day she died, and she was going to die fairly young, because criminals don't live to be extremely old. Their end, their last day usually comes quickly, and it's usually very horrific, very bad, and unforgiving. But the people who are honest, like Oliver, like Mr. Brownlow, like Mrs. Mainley and Rose and her husband, they end up inheriting a good life, because they try to be good people, and they don't go um, down a path of darkness. Now, we can say that maybe having parents, having opportunities is the cause of them being good. In the novel, there's parts in the novel that does say this. Sometimes it is your opportunities. Your opportunities, if you have no opportunities to make yourself better, to end up in a good place, um, you might very well become a criminal. But when you do have the means and the necessities to be a good and honest person, you might end up in the path of good. So opportunities and people who care about you do play a large role in this novel. And maybe this novel is saying that the connections that we have with people and the opportunities that we have in this world oftentimes do determine who we are and who we will become. Because Nancy did say if somebody did intervene into her life when she was younger, maybe she would have chosen a path of honest living. So that's my summary analysis of the novel. Very good novel. Charles Dickens, he knows what to do to make a novel interesting, and very, very, um, um, you know, he knows how to capture your mind. He knows how to conjure up questions that you yourself have never thought of. So that's my summary of the novel. I hope you guys like the summary. Please remember to like, subscribe, and or leave a comment. And I'll see you guys in my next video.